All right, how we doing, folks? I'm just hanging out here this morning, messing around with some gear, drinking a little bit of coffee. My mother-in-law recently brought me some coffee down from Pennsylvania. This is Soren's Blend from Commonplace Coffee. This is my favorite coffee in the world. TJ, who runs Commonplace, just makes awesome roasts. So if you're ever up that way, definitely get some of their coffee. But yeah, I'm messing around with the Keeley Halo this morning. This is maybe my favorite modern delay pedal. The repeats on this are just so rich and nice. Just really, really great sounding. So I've been messing around with that this morning. Kind of reminded me of some of the big ambient kind of sounds that a lot of people try to conjure up when they're playing church music and playing in praise and worship bands. And I had a guy reach out to me recently on Instagram. He asked me a really good question I thought would make a good topic for a video. And he said, "Richie, I'm a church guitar player, but I want to break into country. I want to broaden my horizons and kind of learn how to play some other stuff." And I kind of come from a similar background. I started playing in church when I was 15 at a local church in my hometown. And I really learned a lot about how to play in a band from that experience. And so I thought today I'd talk a little bit about some of the pros and some of the cons of being a church musician, and maybe give you some tips if you're like this gentleman and you're maybe a church guitar player but you're looking to break into other genres. How to go about that. What can you take from your experience of playing in church, and how do you broaden your horizons, and how do you take what you've learned and apply it elsewhere? So we'll talk about that a little bit. I'll give you some tips, but let's talk about some of the pros and cons of being a church player. So some of the positives, I would say, like in my case, for example, if you are from a small town or you grow up in a rural area, it's not like the cities where there's lots of clubs and live music happening all the time. A lot of times in these places, the only live music in town is happening on Sunday morning. So church is, in many cases, the only place where you'll go and see a live drummer and a bass player and a guitar player with any regularity. So sometimes church is the only opportunity that you would have. And that was certainly true in my case. Like I said, the church I grew up in had a praise team, and there was a live drummer and a bass player, and there was a guy there that played electric guitar, played a PRS through a Fender Twin. And he kind of took me under his wing, and he knew that I was interested in playing guitar, and just sort of showed me gear that I'd never seen before. Kind of taught me, you don't have to crank the distortion all the time. Here's a tube screamer, try this instead. I learned a lot about tone and a lot about how to serve the song just from playing in that band and just having that guy sort of take me under his wing and show me the ropes. So I think one of the big pros to playing in church is that it gives you the opportunity to learn how to play in a band. And if you add up, for example, all of the Sundays in a year that you would play, you're getting a lot of reps in. I think about, the Beatles in their early days playing live in Germany before they were ever really famous. And a lot of people kind of attribute their success and their tightness as a band to all those hours that they spent playing in clubs in Germany before they were ever famous. And I think there's something to be said for that. I think, just cutting your teeth on playing live, you're already sort of a step ahead of your average bedroom guitarist who doesn't ever play live, just by virtue of doing it all the time with your church band. And one of the tips that I would give you is, if you're taking some of your knowledge from learning in church and you're wanting to kind of broaden your horizons and maybe expand your guitar playing a little bit beyond the walls of the church, a lot of the things are going to be the same. Music is music, right? If you're going to go play in a cover band doing like pop rock tunes, the 1, 5, 6 minor, 4, that's all going to be part of your language and part of your repertoire just as much as it would be at church. And so that's one thing I'll say. Like, I learned the Nashville number system from playing in church, just because you'd come in and you'd have this whole batch of songs that you would need to learn for that week. And they're all pretty simple stuff. 1, 4, 5, 6 minor, sometimes a 2 minor, but otherwise, we weren't really playing jazz, right? It's pretty straightforward stuff. And so you learn how to learn from the experience, and you can take that and apply it to country. You can apply it to rock. In the case of country, especially modern country, a lot of 1, 4, 5 in that stuff. And so if that's what you're into and that's what you want to learn, you're gonna take right off. The other thing too is, I'll say about gear. I still play in church. I still play on Sunday morning in the church that I go to now, and I use the same pedal board for that I do for tracking country sessions. And it's just a Vox style amp, a couple overdrives, some delay and reverb. And I keep it pretty simple. If you're interested in the actual pedal board, I've got a video you can watch on that. But yeah, you don't have to overthink the rig. If you're already playing in church, what you're using is most likely going to work just fine for rock or for country. So don't overthink the gear piece. But here's one thing that I'll say is kind of a con to playing in church, and that's that a lot of guys kind of end up insulating themselves from the outside world musically. And you begin to think of yourself as a church guitarist or worship guitarist. And I would push back on that. I think that's not the right mindset to have as a musician. I think that there's really no such thing as a worship guitarist. I think there are only guitarists. And you shouldn't think of yourself as a worship guitarist. I think you kind of do a disservice when you think of yourself this way, because, think if you have a guy in your local church congregation who is a carpenter, and let's say, he used his skills as a carpenter to build a new fellowship hall for your church, and he's this, amazing craftsman. That guy wouldn't call himself a church carpenter. He's just a carpenter. And when he leaves, he goes and builds other stuff outside of church. And all of that kind of comes together to make him, who he is. And I think that we should think of ourselves similarly as musicians, whether you play in church or not. I kind of don't think of myself as a church guitar player, even though I do it. Most weeks I'm up there on Sunday morning and I'm playing. I'm just a guitar player, really. And all of my influences outside of church, I bring those into what I play in church. And in some ways, what I learned from church and those songs inform how I play outside of church. So it all is sort of a circle that runs together. And I think what happens when you think of yourself as only a church guitar player is that you become kind of a system QB. I don't know how many football fans there are out there, but what that basically means is that, a system QB is a quarterback who kind of can only succeed in one specific type of offense, and he has to have like all of these specific pieces around him in order to win games, basically. And if you remove any of those pieces and take that QB out of his comfort zone, suddenly he's not such a good quarterback. That's kind of what happens, I think, with worship guitar. You sort of end up insulating yourself and only being good at playing this one form and in this one form factor. And I think that's maybe not the healthiest thing for a musician. I think you end up dulling your craft a little bit, and the irony is that it may feel like you are serving God by, not ever playing anything but Christian music and church music, but I think we should be a little more like the carpenter that helps with the fellowship hall. Be an awesome carpenter outside of church too, and just have a love for working with wood. And I think that kind of goes into my next point that I want to make, which is that the biggest strides that you'll make in your guitar playing and in your musicianship will happen when you're not even holding your instrument. I think some of the best progress that I've made as a musician has all happened up here when I wasn't even holding a guitar, just by discovering a new artist or a new guitar player or a new genre and exposing myself to a whole new world of music and getting really inspired. And then when I come back and I sit down with my guitar, suddenly I've got this whole new vocabulary of musical ideas that just come flowing out of me. And it's not something that you can really teach via technique. It's just something that you have to love and you have to learn to appreciate and enjoy. I think what ends up happening sometimes with guitar players who only play in church is it ends up dulling your curiosity, and that's like the only world that you live in, and it's the only kind of guitar playing that you are really interested in learning how to play. And maybe it's because your worship leader only lets you play exactly the licks that are on the Elevation or the Bethel records, and I think that that's kind of a shame. I think the best thing that you can do for yourself as a guitar player is to learn to love the instrument as a craft in and of itself, and to take in influences from all over and then pour that back into your playing, whether that's on Sunday morning or not. I know for myself, like I said, a guy took me under his wing and I started playing in church when I was 15. But that guy did more than just show me how to play guitar in church. He also handed me some records that I had never heard from artists who were not Christian artists that made me a better guitar player and musician. And I think that you have to just foster that curiosity. A lot of times, like, I'll talk to guys who are church guitarists and they at most maybe listen to John Mayer and respect John Mayer as a guitar player. And don't get me wrong, Mayer is awesome. But there's a whole vast world of guitar playing out there that I think if you're a big fan of Mayer, you should be interested in chasing down. For example, why does John Mayer play the way John Mayer plays? Well, if you were curious, you might discover Stevie Ray Vaughan because of your love of John Mayer, and then that might lead you to Albert King and all these blues greats and just open this whole wide world of guitar playing and vocabulary. So I think that's my main advice here, is that there's not really a technique that I can teach you or a practice routine that I can show you that's going to set you up for success any better than you just going out and listening to more music and filling your brain with more musical vocabulary. I think that's the best thing that you can do for yourself if you're looking to cross-train as a guitar player. And what ends up happening when you do that is you bring those influences back in with you, and you become not only a better guitar player, but a better church guitar player. The stuff that you learn, your influences, all of that stuff becomes part of you and part of who you are as a player. And you end up becoming this really interesting mosaic of influences. And I would really encourage that. I mean, I think that's what makes a good guitar player. When I got into my mid-20s, I discovered all these amazing country guitar players like Danny Gatton and Brent Mason and John Jorgensen. And I just soaked all of that stuff in, and before I knew it, it was just coming out of me when I played guitar. Everything I played just sounded a little bit twangy. Some of my bandmates over the years, even at church, have told me that my fingers have a southern accent. Like, it's just the way that it comes out now, and it informs the way that I play everything. And I think that that's kind of cool personally. I even apply it to the way that I play in church. And the song that you're hearing on this video is a song that we wrote and recorded at my church, and it's me playing guitar. And you can hear the country influence on my playing, even though it's very much a modern praise and worship style song. I'll play you the solo from this song and I think you'll hear what I mean. So yeah, I hope this was helpful for some of you church guitarists out there. I think my best bit of advice is you don't have to stop playing in church to be a better guitar player, but you should consider broadening your horizons and seeing what other influences you can bring in to what you do on Sundays. Well, that's all for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you like this, give it a like. If you're not subscribed, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.